You know that feeling when you're watching some political drama unfold and you just think, hang on, haven't I seen this movie before? Well, it turns out Karl Marx had that exact thought. Today, we're going to dive into one of his sharpest, most cutting works, the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte. It's all about how the French Revolution of 1848, this huge fight for liberty, somehow ended up as this bizarre, almost comical political repeat. So, the big question is, how does a tragedy turn into a farce?
And this right here, this is the legendary opening line that kicks the whole thing off. Marx is basically saying that history has a weird sense of humor. He looks back at the first great French Revolution in 1789, and he sees this world-changing epic tragedy, full of heroes and real sacrifice. But then he looks at the sequel, the Revolution of 1848, and what does he see? A parody, a cheap knockoff, a total farce. So yeah, that's the central puzzle we're exploring today. I mean, how on earth does a nation overthrow a king in the name of freedom, only to end up, just a few years later, under the thumb of an autocrat? And not just any autocrat, Louis Bonaparte, the nephew of the original Napoleon. Marx's answer, well, it digs deep into the class struggles and, let's call them historical echoes that made it all happen. All right, so Marx's first big idea is this. When people try to make history, they're not really starting from scratch. They're actually haunted. They think they're creating something brand new, but really, they're just surrounded by the ghosts of everything that came before. And this quote, man, it just perfectly captures his point. He says that in these huge moments of crisis, when everything's up in the air, people don't invent something totally new. Instead, they anxiously conjure up the spirits of the past. It's like they reach back in time, borrowing old slogans, putting on old costumes, and speaking in a borrowed language, all because they're hoping to grab some of that old-school glory for themselves. And this, right here, is the key difference for Marx. He's saying the revolutionaries of 1789, they were the real deal. They genuinely channeled the spirit of, the ancient Roman Republic to build a totally new, modern society. It was a tragedy, for sure, but it was authentic. But the 1848 version? Nah, that was just plain dress-up. They had all the right costumes, but none of the actual substance. It was the ghost of a revolution, not the living, breathing spirit of one. Okay, so if these guys were just play acting, how did it all go so wrong, so spectacularly? Well, according to Marx, it was this chaotic downward spiral. And what was driving it? The deep, messy conflicts between all the different social classes in France. See, Marx saw these two revolutions as moving in totally opposite directions. The first one, back in 1789, that was an ascending line. It's like each group that took power was more radical, more revolutionary than the last, pushing things forward. But 1848? Complete opposite. It was a descending line. It was basically a political firing squad where each class turns around and betrays the class right below it just to hang on to a little bit of power. And you can literally watch it happen step by step. So first, pretty much everyone gangs up to absolutely crush the working class, the proletariat, in June 48. Done. Then, the most conservative guys in that alliance immediately turn on their more moderate Republican allies and just shove them out of the way. And finally, this new, powerful conservative group gets totally paralyzed by its own infighting. They can't agree on anything, they can't govern, and they basically just create this giant power vacuum. It's just like Marx said, each party kicks from behind at the one driving forward. And this brings us to the ultimate irony of the whole story. Marx argues that the ruling class, the bourgeoisie, basically engineered its own political downfall. And why? In a desperate attempt to protect its money. Okay, so you've got to understand this key player, the Party of Order. Now, this wasn't a normal political party. It was a weird mashup of two different types of royalists who, get this, secretly hated each other. But they agreed on one crucial thing. Protecting their property and their business interests was more important than absolutely anything else. Their real god wasn't some king. It was capital. So to protect their wealth, they go on the offensive. But who do they attack? Themselves, basically.
They attack the very democratic tools that gave them power in the first place. They started seeing threats around every corner. Any call for a small reform, that's socialism. A critical newspaper article, an attempt on society. Any public meeting? Socialism. It was just full-blown absolute panic. And this leads to this incredible, mind-bending contradiction. Marx says the bourgeoisie realized that to keep its economic dominance, what he calls its social power, it had to actually destroy its own political power. I mean, think about that. To save its purse, it had to forfeit the crown. They willingly handed over the keys to the government, hoping some strongman would come in, keep the workers in line, and just let them get back to the business of making money. And believe me, they weren't messing around. They passed a new electoral law in 1850 that, get this, just wiped 3 million voters right off the books. Poof, gone. Mostly workers and poor people, of course. They got rid of universal suffrage with the stroke of a pen, thinking it would secure their power. What they didn't realize was that they were sawing off the very branch they were sitting on. So you've got this total chaos, right? You've got fear, you've got political self-sabotage, and all of this creates the perfect stage for one man to just walk in and take the whole thing. Enter Louis Bonaparte. Now, according to Marx, it's a huge mistake to see this Bonaparte guy as some kind of political genius. He wasn't the cause of the problem. He was a symptom of the disease. He was just an adventurer, a nobody, who was able to waltz right into the power vacuum that all the other classes created when they fought each other to a complete standstill.
And he was brilliant at being all things to all people. To the peasants, he promised to get rid of the taxes the city elites were putting on them. To the army, he promised a glorious return to the days of his uncle, Napoleon. The big bourgeoisie, the business owners, they saw him as a useful, temporary bridge back to a monarchy. And the workers, they saw him as the perfect weapon to get revenge on the very Republicans who had crushed them. He was like a blank screen that everyone could project their own hopes and fears onto. And that leads us to the final and honestly pretty chilling takeaway from Marx's whole analysis. The strongman Louis Bonaparte, he didn't have to kick down the door to seize power. It was just given to him. The classes of French society, in their crazy scramble to protect their own little interests, they dismantled their own democratic house, brick by brick, and then they personally handed him the key. Which, brings us all the way back to today. I mean, Marx wrote this stuff almost 170 years ago, but his analysis feels shockingly modern, doesn't it? It really leaves us with a question for ourselves. What old costumes are we wearing in our politics today? What historical ghosts are we trying to conjure up? And maybe most importantly, what traditions of dead generations are weighing, just like a nightmare, on our world right now?